It's not the price tag that sparks the reaction. It's the story people think they're seeing. Because on the surface, nothing feels off. The same polished coats, the same luxury labels, the same carefully curated appearances. And yet, the moment one of them steps out, it feels refined, intentional, almost admirable. The other? Somehow, it lands differently, sharper, louder, more scrutinized. And that contrast isn't accidental, it's constructed. What looks like fashion is actually perception in motion. Every fabric choice, every repeat outfit, every silhouette quietly signals something deeper. Not just style, but purpose, identity, and belonging. And once you start seeing those signals, you realize this was never about clothes at all. What makes this entire conversation so fascinating is that on paper, there shouldn't be a conversation at all. Two women, both positioned in the global spotlight, both wearing high-end designers, both stepping out in pieces that cost more than most people's monthly income. And yet, the public reaction splits so dramatically that it almost feels like we're watching two completely different realities unfold. When Catherine, Princess of Wales, appears in a structured coat with a four-figure price tag, the narrative instantly wraps itself around words like diplomatic, polished, and appropriate. There's an unspoken understanding that what she's wearing is part of something larger. But when Meghan Markle steps out in something equally expensive, the tone shifts. Suddenly, the conversation leans toward excess, intention, and scrutiny. That gap in perception doesn't happen by accident. It's rooted in something far more psychological than fashion itself. At the center of this is what behavioral economists and sociologists refer to as signaling theory. In simple terms, everything we wear communicates something: status, intention, identity. But the way those signals are interpreted depends entirely on context. The exact same item can send two completely different messages depending on who is wearing it, where they are, and what role they're perceived to be fulfilling. And this is where the divergence begins. Catherine's wardrobe operates within a very clearly defined institutional framework. She isn't just dressing as an individual, she's dressing as a representative of the monarchy. That distinction changes everything. Her clothing choices are rarely viewed as personal indulgence. Instead, they're interpreted as part of her professional toolkit. Much like a uniform, but elevated. So when she steps out in an expensive coat, it doesn't read as, "Look at what I can afford." It reads as, "This is what the role requires." That subtle shift reframes luxury from something personal into something functional. It becomes less about her and more about what she represents. And she reinforces that perception through consistency. One of the most overlooked yet powerful elements of her style strategy is repetition. Catherine is known for re-wearing coats, dresses, and even formal gowns across multiple years. In a world where public figures are often expected to debut something new at every appearance, this behavior stands out. It signals restraint. It signals intention. More importantly, it signals respect for resources. When audiences see a $3,000 coat worn 5 times over several years, the narrative changes. It no longer feels like a splurge, it feels like an investment. That single behavioral cue softens the perception of luxury and brings it closer to something people can relate to. It creates what can be described as aspirational proximity. Even if someone can't afford the exact piece, they can understand the logic behind it. And that shift, while subtle, dramatically alters how her choices are received. Luxury, when tied to a role, feels justified. Luxury, when tied to individuality, becomes open to interpretation. And often, that interpretation leans critical, places her firmly within a fashion language that is heavily associated with exclusivity. These looks are intentionally understated, but they rely on an insider understanding of quality, tailoring, and brand recognition. It's a visual code that says, if you know, you know. The problem is that this kind of signaling increases social distance. Instead of inviting people in, another critical factor is the lack of visible repetition. Where Catherine's repeated outfits signal restraint, Meghan's consistently new looks can signal the opposite. Even if the pieces are thoughtfully chosen, the absence of repetition creates an impression of constant consumption, particularly during key periods like her early years in the royal family. While some of that can be attributed to building a new wardrobe, the scale still stands out, and those frameworks shape everything. There's also a deeper cultural layer at play. Within that system, fashion is expected to support the institution, not overshadow it. Catherine's approach aligns almost perfectly with those expectations. Her style feels like an extension of the monarchy itself, steady, reliable, and carefully calibrated. Meghan, on the other hand, brings influences from American celebrity culture. They're celebrated. In that context, her style makes complete sense. The tension arises because she exists at the intersection of these two systems, without fully belonging to either. And that creates a kind of identity ambiguity. When audiences can't clearly categorize someone, royal or celebrity, institutional or individual, they become more critical. Not necessarily because of what that person is doing, but because the signals feel inconsistent. Fashion, in this case, becomes the most visible expression of that inconsistency. Every choice is analyzed, not just for how it looks, but for what it represents. And when the perceived message doesn't align with audience expectations, the reaction intensifies. So what we're really seeing isn't a debate about cost or even about style. It's a case study in perception management. Catherine's wardrobe works because it tells a clear, consistent story, one that aligns with her role, reinforces her image, and meets audience expectations. Meghan's wardrobe, while often equally sophisticated, tells a more complex and sometimes conflicting story. Because what separates these two approaches isn't taste level, access, or even budget, it's execution under scrutiny. And execution in this context is everything. When Catherine, Princess of Wales, steps into a public setting, her outfit rarely exists in isolation. It's calibrated against the environment, the purpose of the event, and the message she's expected to reinforce. There's a kind of visual harmony at play. Nothing feels accidental, and more importantly, nothing feels out of place. This is where her approach becomes almost architectural. Silhouettes are structured, hemlines are intentional. Footwear is practical for the terrain she's walking on. Accessories are restrained but meaningful. Even when the pieces themselves are expensive, the overall composition communicates balance. That balance is what makes the outfit feel appropriate rather than excessive. Because appropriateness is one of the most powerful filters in public perception. An expensive garment, when placed in the right context, disappears into the bigger picture. It becomes part of a cohesive narrative. But the same garment, placed in the wrong context, suddenly becomes the focal point, and not in a good way. Catherine consistently passes this context test. Think about appearances where she's engaging in outdoor events, walking across uneven ground, or interacting closely with the public. Her footwear alone tells a story, often practical, stable, and aligned with the activity. That single choice signals preparedness and awareness. It communicates that she's thinking beyond aesthetics, and that builds trust. Because people don't just evaluate what they see, they evaluate what it implies. Practical choices imply consideration. Consideration implies respect, and respect strengthens relatability. Now contrast that with moments where Meghan Markle has been perceived as missing that alignment. There have been instances where styling choices, like stilettos on grass or overly long trousers dragging along the ground, felt disconnected from the setting. On their own, these are small details. But under public scrutiny, small details compound into larger narratives. Instead of reading as polished, the outfit can come across as impractical or overly curated. And once that perception takes hold, it reframes everything else. The price tag feels louder. The intention feels more self-focused. The relatability starts to slip. Because the audience begins to ask, consciously or subconsciously, who is this outfit really for? That question sits at the core of the difference. Catherine's styling answers it clearly. The outfit is for the role, the event, and the people she's engaging with. Meghan's styling at times leaves that answer more ambiguous. And ambiguity, especially in highly visible public figures, often invites criticism. Another layer to this is precision. Catherine's garments are almost always impeccably tailored. Lines are clean, fits are exact. There's a sense of discipline in how the clothing interacts with her body. Nothing feels oversized without intention. Nothing feels off balance. That precision communicates effort, but in a way that looks effortless. It's a paradox, but a powerful one. Because when something looks effortless, people assume mastery, and mastery builds credibility. Meghan's aesthetic, particularly her preference for looser, minimalist silhouettes, operates differently. Oversized coats, relaxed tailoring, and fluid shapes are part of a broader fashion language, one that can look incredibly sophisticated when executed with precision. But it's also a high-risk approach, because minimalism leaves very little room for error. There are no bold patterns or dramatic elements to distract the eye. Every seam, every proportion, every fabric choice becomes more visible. And if even one element feels slightly off, the entire look can lose its impact. That's the trade-off of understated luxury. It demands perfection to read as intentional. Otherwise, it can be interpreted as careless or incomplete, even when it's neither. And this is where repetition, once again, plays a critical role. Catherine's repeated outfits don't just signal restraint, they refine perception over time. Each reappearance of a garment reinforces its identity. People become familiar with it. It gains context. It becomes part of a narrative rather than a one-time statement. That familiarity reduces friction. When audiences recognize a piece, they spend less time analyzing its cost or questioning its purpose. Instead, they focus on the overall impression. And that shift in attention works in her favor. Meghan's lower frequency of visible repetition removes that layer of familiarity. Each outfit feels new, which means each outfit is evaluated from scratch. And in a high-scrutiny environment, constant novelty can become a disadvantage, because it resets the conversation every single time. There's also the matter of symbolic dressing. Catherine frequently incorporates elements that carry meaning, whether it's wearing designers from the country she's visiting, choosing colors that align with an event's theme, or re-wearing pieces tied to significant moments. These choices may seem subtle, but they add depth to her presentation. They turn fashion into communication. And when people sense that there's meaning behind what they're seeing, they engage with it differently. It feels thoughtful. It feels intentional. It feels respectful. That sense of purpose acts as a buffer against criticism. Because even if the item is expensive, the narrative justifies it. Meghan's wardrobe, while often aesthetically refined, tends to lean more heavily into personal expression rather than symbolic messaging. And again, that's not inherently negative. It simply operates under a different framework. But without those visible layers of meaning, the audience is left to interpret the intention on their own. And interpretation, especially in public discourse, is rarely neutral. It's influenced by expectations, biases, and broader narratives about identity and role. So when Meghan wears a high-end minimalist outfit, the lack of explicit contextual cues can lead people to default assumptions, often centered around status signaling or personal branding, even if that's not the intent. This brings us back to the concept of alignment. Catherine's style aligns almost seamlessly with the expectations of British royal culture: restraint, continuity, and service. Her wardrobe reinforces those values at every turn. There's no visible contradiction between what she represents and how she presents herself. Meghan's position is more complex. She exists outside the traditional structure of the monarchy, yet remains associated with it. She engages in public life, but not within a clearly defined institutional role. She draws from celebrity culture, but doesn't fully operate within its ecosystem either. That in-between space creates tension. And fashion becomes one of the most immediate ways that tension is expressed. Because clothing is visual, it's immediate. It doesn't require explanation. People see it, interpret it, and form conclusions within seconds. And when those conclusions don't align with a clear narrative, they tend to skew critical. So what we're witnessing isn't just a difference in style, it's a difference in narrative clarity. Catherine's execution feels cohesive because every element, fit, context, repetition, symbolism, works together to support a single, consistent story. Meghan's execution, while often sophisticated, operates across multiple narratives at once. And in a space where perception is everything, consistency becomes the deciding factor. Because the audience isn't just looking at what's being worn, they're looking for what it means. When you bring everything together, the psychology, the execution, the data, it becomes clear that this isn't a surface-level conversation about fashion. It's a deeper case study in how perception is engineered, reinforced, and ultimately accepted as truth. Because once the numbers enter the picture, they don't just support the narrative, they sharpen it. Across multiple years, tracked estimates consistently show that Meghan Markle has spent significantly more on new wardrobe pieces than Catherine, Princess of Wales. In some years, the gap isn't just noticeable, it's massive. We're talking about differences that stretch into hundreds of thousands of dollars, particularly during the early royal period. And yet, here's where it gets interesting. Even in years where the average cost per item is similar, or where Catherine's individual pieces are just as expensive, the perception doesn't rebalance. It doesn't suddenly become equal in the public eye. Catherine is still viewed as measured, while Meghan continues to be associated with excess. That tells you something critical. Perception isn't built on raw numbers. It's built on patterns, consistency, and narrative reinforcement. Catherine's spending, even at higher levels during significant events like coronations or state occasions, fits into a framework people already understand. There's a built-in justification. A large-scale event calls for elevated presentation. A future queen representing the monarchy is expected to reflect a certain level of formality and prestige. So even when the price tags climb, they don't feel out of place. They feel earned. Meghan's spending, on the other hand, often exists outside of that clearly defined framework. Without an institutional role guiding when, where, and why certain outfits are worn, each appearance is judged more independently. And when high-cost items appear frequently without visible repetition or contextual anchors, the narrative shifts toward overconsumption. Even if the reality is more nuanced, take a closer look at the cumulative effect. Reports suggest that over a multi-year period, Meghan's wardrobe spending has exceeded Catherine's by well over $500,000. That figure alone is enough to influence public opinion, but it doesn't act in isolation. It reinforces what people already believe they're seeing. That's how confirmation bias works. Once an audience forms an initial impression, they begin to selectively notice information that supports it. So every new expensive outfit Meghan wears doesn't just stand on its own. It adds to an existing storyline. It becomes another example rather than a standalone choice. Meanwhile, Catherine benefits from the opposite effect. Her repeated outfits, her visible restraint, her alignment with expectations, all of these create a baseline of trust. So when she does wear something expensive, it doesn't trigger the same reaction. It's interpreted within a narrative that already favors her. And that difference compounds over time. There's also a strategic element in how visibility plays into this. Catherine's wardrobe includes a significant number of reworn pieces that don't always generate headlines. They quietly reinforce her image without drawing attention to cost. Meghan's newer pieces, by contrast, are more likely to be identified, priced, and circulated, especially because they're new. So the visibility of spending isn't equal, even if the categories overlap. And visibility shapes perception just as much as reality does. But beyond the data, beyond the psychology, beyond the styling choices, there's a final layer that ties all of this together: purpose. Catherine's wardrobe consistently communicates that it exists in service of something larger than herself. Whether it's diplomacy, tradition, or representation, her clothing feels anchored. It has a reason to exist beyond aesthetics. That anchoring changes how luxury is interpreted. Because luxury, when attached to purpose, feels justified. It feels like a tool rather than a statement. Meghan's wardrobe, operating without that same institutional anchor, is more closely associated with personal identity. And again, that's not inherently negative, it's simply different. But in the context of public scrutiny, personal expression is far more vulnerable to criticism than role-based presentation, because it invites judgment. People don't just see the outfit, they evaluate the intention behind it. And when that intention isn't immediately clear or universally accepted, the reaction becomes more polarized. That's why two identical price tags can produce completely opposite responses. One is seen as representing something, the other is seen as expressing something. And in a space like the monarchy, where symbolism, continuity, and restraint are deeply ingrained values, those two signals don't carry the same weight. So when you strip everything back, the conclusion becomes almost unavoidable. This was never about whether one wardrobe is more expensive than the other. It was about how effectively each wardrobe communicates its purpose. Catherine's style works because it aligns, perfectly, consistently, almost effortlessly, with the expectations of her role. Every choice reinforces the same message, over and over again, until that message becomes instinctive for the audience. Meghan's style, while often polished and modern, operates across multiple identities at once: celebrity, public figure, former royal. And that complexity makes it harder to control how those signals are received. Because when the message isn't singular, the interpretation won't be either. And that's where perception takes over. Not in the price tag, not in the label, but in the meaning people attach to what they see. So the next time a headline praises one look and criticizes another, even when the numbers match, you'll know exactly what's happening beneath the surface. It's not fashion being judged, it's the story behind it. And now I want to hear your take on this. Do you think it's truly about perception and role? Or do personal choices still carry more weight than we realize? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives like this.